Hey, you want to see something really scary? Yes, indeed, it is time to talk about Film Score Monthly's 2009 re-release for Jerry Goldsmith's masterpiece of science fiction fantasy film music writing in Twilight Zone, the movie. This 1983 big screen tribute was of course based upon the beloved supernatural television show and featured 4 segments, the first being the prologue, which was called Real Scary, and the second being Time Out, both directed by John Landis, followed up by Steven Spielberg's Kick the Can, thereafter Joe Dante's It's a Good Life, and finally summing up the film with Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, directed by George Miller. I'm Ted the Soundtrack Guy. Stick with me until the end of this video. I'm going to be talking about another masterful Jerry Goldsmith score for the horror comedy film which came out the following year after Twilight Zone the movie, and which develops a lot of the ideas and themes that he came up with for the final segment in that film, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Now, critics and audiences alike were mixed about Twilight Zone the movie, some of that having to do, I'm sure, with the long shadow which was cast over that production after a tragic special effects accident caused a helicopter to crash, killing Vic Morrow and 2 child actors. Unfortunately, that has stained the reputation of this film and made it something of an infamous project in the annals of horror cinematic history. Nevertheless, this film does run the creative gamut to mostly satisfying effect, if you ask me, and never more satisfyingly than when we're focused on the music that Jerry Goldsmith wrote for this project. In terms of his own skill and mastery in composing music for every conceivable genre, Jerry Goldsmith was the obvious choice to score a big screen adaptation of Twilight Zone the movie, and also because he had scored a number of episodes from the original series. But to focus in on this 2009 Film Score Monthly re-release of this soundtrack in particular, I want to point out that this is a labor of love, and it's marked all over this album. From the liner notes to the artwork to the remastered sound, this is a wonderful achievement in terms of film music preservation. Now, there was a previous soundtrack release back at the release of the film itself in 1983 on the Warner Brothers label, and that was a terrific soundtrack as well. They had this score kind of organized together in these terrific suites that captured the essence of each segment and gave such a satisfying overall listen for the entire score experience. That album is definitely worth picking up too. Now, interestingly, if you do happen to have a copy or get a copy of the Film Score Monthly re-release to this soundtrack, you are able to program that album out of the remastered re-release and enjoy it the same way that you will be able to if you have the physical Warner Brothers label copy. The sound quality on that original release was incredible, but the sound quality on this Film Score Monthly re-release, it will blow your socks off. It was remastered by First Generation Masters by Mike Matessino in cooperation with Bruce Botnick, who of course was Jerry Goldsmith's longtime recording engineer and who also engineered the recording originally for Twilight Zone the movie. So his return to this project must have been like a homecoming for him, and this is where that labor of love comes into play that I'm talking about. It is evident in every single second of this remastered soundtrack. It is just gorgeous, and you can hear details that you could never hear before, and the entire soundscape that Jerry Goldsmith came up with for this score just comes to life in such a special way, and quite frankly, catapults you into the Twilight Zone. And while I'm raving about the remastered sound, I need to take a moment and rave about these liner notes. These are home-run liner notes. They're extensive, and they're written by a number of different authoritative figures in the film music field. Originally, in the 1983 album, there were brief liner notes from Carol Serling. These are also represented here. The new and original authoritative liner notes for this particular release are by Mike Matessino and Jeff Bond, with additional notes by Bruce Botnick. Now, these notes were so technical that I had a little bit of trouble keeping up with what he was saying, because he went into specific pieces of recording equipment and specific synthesizers and specific microphones and specific speakers and talking about the dynamics of the room that they recorded in, but nevertheless, it was a fascinating read, and it doesn't stop there. The liner notes also include a note from director Joe Dante himself, who became so enamored with Jerry Goldsmith that from that point on, having worked on Twilight Zone the movie together, they forged a lifelong collaborative partnership in one of the most exciting director-composer relationships Hollywood has ever known. Now, as already stated, Jerry Goldsmith was a master scoring every conceivable genre, but if you ask me, he was particularly strong, particularly brilliant in scoring soundtracks for horror movies and for science fiction movies, and so Twilight Zone the movie was definitely his cup of tea. There are, of course, a lot of reasons for that. I think one of the reasons has to do with his inventiveness, and part of that had to do with the fact that he was so open to trying different ways of expressing his musical ideas. Now, Twilight Zone the movie, for instance, was the first time he began to regularly incorporate electronic music in with the regular orchestra. Jerry Goldsmith is quoted as saying, "I have always wanted to treat the electronics as part of the regular orchestra and record the whole thing acoustically." So, as I've said in previous videos regarding some of Jerry Goldsmith's work, he wanted to have the electronics in the open air so that you could hear it in the air, have it balanced in the air while the orchestra was playing. And one of the reasons why this soundtrack is so effective, is so magical and mysterious and truly does take you to another dimension, is because in the open air we have these ethereal, otherworldly electronic effects floating around, drifting around. You can almost feel it. It's truly one of the most palpable musical experiences I can think of. And this element that I'm speaking of right now in terms of the electronics wedded with the orchestrations is most prominently featured in the Joe Dante segment, It's a Good Life. And the rest of the soundtrack also features plenty of electronic effects, but in addition to those, part of the reason why it's so effective is just Jerry Goldsmith is right there in the fabric of the Twilight Zone. He was really tapped in to that particular concept. Now, the movie begins off as the real scary segment as a prologue, and that goes unscored. Interestingly, the two men in the car, Dan Aykroyd and Albert Brooks, at one point start playing a television theme guessing game where they hum these themes to television shows and they try to guess which show it is. Now, I can relate to that as the soundtrack guy, right? Back in the day when I was a kid, I used to play the guessing game for soundtracks with my sisters all the time. But right after that prologue segment, it goes into the Marius Constant classic theme for Twilight Zone, the series, and that was actually debuted in the second season, believe it or not. Many people might not realize that Bernard Herrmann originally composed the first season's Twilight Zone theme. But in a lot of ways, I find the minimalist, avant-garde, Marius Constant theme to be quite Goldsmith-esque, actually, and I think that's part of the reason why he was so successful in recreating and re-recording that theme for this movie. They didn't just paste it from previous recordings. They actually did record it afresh for this album. Now, the first major segment of the film, which is of course Time Out, is approached very minimalistically too. Jerry Goldsmith is very percussive heavy in this one. He has a lot of piano work, and then of course his synthesizers. But for the most part, it was just percussion and the 4 grand pianos. Interestingly, one of the players on the grand pianos and synthesizers was, of course, the James Newton Howard we all know as film score composer for such great soundtracks as Dinosaur and Signs and Wyatt Earp and Waterworld. The list goes on and on. I found that very interesting. That was illuminated in the liner notes as well. And as far as the percussion players go, there were many legendary players both on the side of the concert grand pianos and synth players and percussion players, but Jerry Williams, John Williams' brother, was one of the percussion players, and then for one of the source cue tracks for this episode, Anesthesia, Joseph Williams, John Williams' son, sang that particular track. Now, if we want to explore favorite source material, my favorite is Nights Are Forever, when Bill Connor is in the tavern there. It's also on the jukebox as well as the Anesthesia song, and Jerry Goldsmith actually wrote the music for Nights Are Forever, and it was just sung quite beautifully too. I just think it's a terrific 1980s song altogether. The main score to Time Out features very jagged rhythms. It's this nervous sound the whole time, kind of this stomp marching militaristic feel that just intensifies as we go through this episode. And it reminded me of a lot of the work that Jerry Goldsmith did for Contract on Cherry Street, and also segments of his classic score to Chinatown. The 2 tracks which cover this entire episode, I can't really pick between the 2 which one is my favorite, because to be honest with you, as they represented it in the original 1983 soundtrack album, it works so wonderfully as a suite, or all together, that I can't really divide it up all that well in my mind. Musically, it is its own cohesive whole, and it's just a masterwork of percussive intensity. Steven Spielberg's contribution to Twilight Zone, the movie, in Kick the Can, takes a 180-degree shift from the tone that we were set up for in the previous episode, and Jerry Goldsmith's music comes in with this warm sentimentality, and of course the magic is still present, but right now it takes on more of a Peter Pan kind of flavor, and appropriately enough, since it deals with senior citizens in a retirement center finding their inner child and actually even being magically transformed by Scatman Crothers' character, Mr. Bloom, and they turn into children for a period. So Jerry Goldsmith just really nails this magic fairy dust kind of in the air feel for this wonderful, very Spielberg episode. It makes me wonder what an alternate universe would be like, where instead of Spielberg and John Williams, we had Jerry Goldsmith and Steven Spielberg teaming up as creative partners in a lifelong collaborative relationship. Now, of course, I would never trade the Spielberg-Williams collaboration that we all know in the reality that we are currently occupying, but it's just interesting for me to imagine what Jerry Goldsmith might have come up with had he been partnered with Spielberg over the course of his career, because the few times that Goldsmith did work with Steven Spielberg, he created some of the best music that he has ever written with this particular project, and also Poltergeist and some of the other Spielberg-produced Amblin Entertainment features like Gremlins and Gremlins 2. The music for Kick the Can truly is magical and plays the entire spectrum of emotions. This could be a full film score in terms of what Jerry Goldsmith came up with for the thematic elements, the motifs. It's just so rich. It goes from somber and sad to playful, and even reaches into the heavens with elated joy. And the themes that he came up with, the main theme, it's so flexible that he can do all kinds of things with, and even in the brief segment that we're given in Kick the Can, he uses it in a myriad different ways. It's that bum 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 And we first hear that on the harp in the first track of this segment, but Goldsmith goes on to use it on the flute and in strings and even on the synthesizer. In this case, I can pick my favorite track, and that would have to be Young Again / Take Me With You / A New Guest. And this is almost a 10-minute track. In fact, it may be in excess of 10 minutes. And the main medley that we're talking about here is also played as a waltz on this track when the young A.G. dances with a young Mrs. Dempsey. It's so very playful. And again, there's shades of Peter Pan and kind of gives us a glimpse into the future hook that Spielberg would end up making. On flute and synth, there are these flourishes as the seniors are transformed back into children. And we also are given this nice, quiet, and plaintive and somewhat sad secondary theme during the part where the kids kind of realize that it's more important that they stay youthful in their minds than that they actually go back in time, so to speak, and become children all over again. And one of my favorite motifs here is the kick the can motif, which Jerry Goldsmith uses in this superb fanfare fashion in the overture during the end credits, and it's the bum 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 bum. Just a wonderful, wonderful bit of music here. And then of course it ends with Scatman Crother's character singing that tune as Goldsmith's lush music on strings just builds and crescendos and kind of takes us off into the heavens and then settles us back down again into this very strange and mysterious location in Joe Dante's offering, It's a Good Life, where we're transported into a ghostly, almost glassy sounding world of fantasy thrumming just beneath the surface of everything. This is in the track I Remember / The House. Absolutely lovely, gorgeous theme in here, in this drifting supernatural mist, so to speak. And then from there, the music swells into this even more impassioned segment on strings. It just is gorgeous and otherworldly. But before that happens, because that segment comes in at the end of that segment, the music becomes gradually more sinister and even less tethered to reality over time. The track, The Picture / The Sister / I Didn't Do It actually reminds me of some of the music in Jerry Goldsmith's score for Magic, because just the way that the strings are played in that particular track reminds me a lot of that sound from the Magic album. Cartoon Monster is one of the highlights as far as Goldsmith's chilling effects for this particular segment, and it happens during the scene where Anthony's uncle is doing the magic trick act, and Anthony grows quickly bored, and he uses his special mind powers to create this monstrous rabbit to come out of his hat, and Jerry Goldsmith uses this comedic stinger effect where he uses the cowbell and the whoopee cushion whistle, an antique car horn, and with the chilling high string chords underneath all that, it really is an incredibly unnerving effect. And there's a similar effect in the track That's All Ethel, where Anthony traps his sister in a nightmare cartoon land, and Jerry's music is just jagged and terrifying. It's like this carnival of terror effect. And then the final track, arguably my favorite track of this particular segment, is the Teach Me No More Tricks track, and that returns us to the glassy, ethereal fantasy world. This is that gorgeous, swelling, string-themed music that we were talking about at the outset of this segment. All in all, one of the strongest episodes in Twilight Zone, the movie, both as the cinematic experience itself and also as the film score. And finally, Twilight Zone, the movie, ends on a high note, no pun intended, or maybe it is intended, with George Miller's Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. John Lithgow gives an exemplary performance in this particular episode. This is just incredible, along with Jerry Goldsmith's suspense writing, which is flawless. This is actually a masterpiece. This is a mini masterpiece that you have got to hear if you are a film music lover. It is so effective and so heart-stopping that you nearly do have a heart attack listening to it, and I actually was feeling a little bit airsick while I was watching this movie and hearing this music. It really is that effective. It's this grinding 4-note rhythm that just grips your throat for cellos, trombones, and tuba. It's this bum 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 bum, and it just does not relent. And John Lithgow's paranoia and fear is just amping up this whole time, and Goldsmith is just right on the knife's edge of this suspense, and you're helplessly right there along with him. In the track No Smoking, there's a French horn segment that reminds me very, very clearly of his Poltergeist score, and the notes themselves actually agree on that one, as well as this solo violin element that's very devilish and kind of capering for the gremlin character that's out on the wing of this plane. And unsurprisingly, that is the thematic element that Jerry Goldsmith takes on into the next year's score for 1984's Gremlins, directed by Joe Dante, and he uses that and just runs with it. It goes all out on Gremlins, but in this particular case, when you combine all of these elements together, the dun 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 element, along with the dun 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 dun, it just, I'm telling you, you want to be creeped out. This is the one. So the John Lithgow character is convinced that there is a menacing gremlin out on the wing of this aircraft trying to sabotage this flight by putting out its engines and tearing up wires and destroying the wing of this plane. And the flight attendants and security and all this, they're trying to calm John Lithgow down, and at one point he does attempt to get calmed down. He shuts the shade on the window and settles into his seat, and this is the best segment of the movie by far. Lithgow's performance really shines here, and Goldsmith's music becomes soothing as Lithgow kind of tries to settle in and forget about it and calm down, but as John Lithgow squirms, you can tell he can't get it out of his head. He's gonna have to open that window shade and he's gonna have to look out there again. Goldsmith builds the anticipation in the most intense fashion, and then when John Lithgow lifts the window shade and sees the gremlin right there in front of his face, Goldsmith's music just bursts with this climactic, terrifying brass that continues into the next track, Hungry Monster, where we get more gremlin shades in the brass work. And it's just so reminiscent of what he's going to end up doing for Joe Dante in next year's picture with him. And it's funny because in that particular scene, George Miller somehow animates John Lithgow's eyes actually bugging out of his skull when he sees the gremlin just beyond the window there. And that's exactly how you feel inside. This music will incite your eyes to literally bug out of their sockets if you're anything like me. But after that, the movie ends in this short epilogue where we get Dan Aykroyd's character again, and we know that he's going to show John Lithgow, who's already pretty much ready for the nut house, something really scary, as if he hasn't already seen such things. And after that, we go into the wonderful overture fanfare triumphant from Jerry Goldsmith, which, like I stated earlier, starts off with that brass fanfare spectacular for the kick the can motif in Spielberg's segment. And from there, we reprise music from It's a Good Life, and then once again, music from Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Overall, this is a shining gem in Jerry Goldsmith's expansive and masterful catalog. I cannot recommend this one enough. Now, as many of you have already undoubtedly guessed by now, the soundtrack that I alluded to at the outset of this video that I would be talking about if you stuck with me until the end is, of course, Joe Dante's 1984 horror comedy Gremlins. And I promise you, the thematic elements, the motifs that he comes up with in the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet episode of Twilight Zone the movie are grandly developed in this soundtrack. It is one of Jerry Goldsmith's masterworks of the 1980s. He has many of them, but it is certainly a standout. Click right here and watch that video right now. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me on another episode of My Favorite Soundtrack with Ted the Soundtrack Guy. We'll see you next time, and in the meantime, happy listening.